Hi, my name is Monica, and I'm doing the Refutation speech on copyright infringement and software policies. Giovanni's definition is that piracy is the process which an original copy of the form of media is exploited into distributing free copies to profit in other ways. His major claim was that downloading pirated software or games hurts developers and consumers alike, but I have concluded that although piracy is illegal, it may not be as bad as we think, and piracy may have some positive effects as well. I will be discussing, one, that the data provided in most cases are over-exaggerated, and two, that there's a bandwagon effect that can actually increase sales. So on my first topic, over-exaggerated data, I was reading a book about the corporate misconduct, the legal, society, and management issues. It is discussed in the SPA, which is also the Software Publishers Association, that companies would estimate the loss of revenue by multiplying the difference between the actual and expected units purchased per personal computer by the number of PCs sold, then averaging the price of the software package as a whole. With that in mind, the book also discusses that the different interpretations of the expected sales of software will certainly lead to varying estimates. Since most of the software companies want the public to think that every single pirated download is gonna translate into a revenue loss, that's not usually the case, since a lot of the pirated copies would not have been purchased to begin with. Emma Wilcott from Forbes magazine has also written on legal and regulatory issues for Times, Daily Telegraph, BBC Radio. She quotes from Anders Draken, which is from the Northeastern University, that the numbers in our investigation suggest that previously reported magnitudes in game piracy are too high, and that the majority of the data is from the actual companies itself, and such as Entertainment Software Association, Business Software Alliance, and the data reported by the industry are potentially biased, partially due to the interest of the actual industry itself, and reduced piracy, and thus potentially overestimating the actual problem that it causes. Of course, partially due to the interest of the industry to reduce piracy and overestimating the problem. Of course, many of the 12.6 million IP addresses that they found to be sharing files over the 3-month period of time that they did their survey, which was really extensive, and they sat down and went through all these different ways that they could do it. The figures that they came up with and the figures that the Entertainment Software Association actually came up with were totally different. They came up with 12.6 million, and the software companies came up with 10 million in 1 month, in just the month of December alone. So they see that is not justified. And then the Office of Technology Assessment, a congregational research organization, noted that when examining software piracy, existing surveys vary considerably and are increasingly less relevant, and that different interpretations of the expected sites of software will certainly lead to different estimates. Software piracy could have a silver lining when software pirates like the product so much that they do actually buy the product in the future. They buy the additions, they buy the upgrades, because they're like, wow, that's really good, so I want to go for it. The bandwagon effect is the other thing I wanted to talk about, because if you like something, you tell your friends. So since there are so many people in this world who cannot justify purchasing software or games without first trying it, it's legitimate. I wouldn't spend an extra $60. There's also the younger customers who can't actually afford the product to begin with. But if they like it because they got the pirated version from somebody else, then they're going to go out and purchase the real one, or purchase the next one, or actually spend more money on it when it wasn't actually something they were going to spend on to begin with. A quote from Sheriff Zoom Software. Some literature has described software policy as a problem and proposed technical solutions to remedy its occurrences. Other literature has framed software policy in a positive light by creating the bandwagon effect, where pirated software increases the visibility of the actual product and makes it appear more beneficial since others are using it. Research has shown that it is beneficial to the producer to allow piracy for users who have a low willingness to actually pay for the product itself. And then Scott Steinberg, who is the head of technology and video game consulting firm, the Tech Savvy Global, as well as the founder of Game Executive Magazine and Game Industry TV, also tells us that there was a problem since the 1980s, that the developers complain about used game sales as well, since they will not earn any money from that because it's already purchased and now it's being purchased again. They discuss the use of such games as Farmville and all the other Facebook games where you can acquire the game for free and make a substantial amount of money from a smaller purchase throughout the process. I know, I spend a lot of money on Candy Crush, don't tell me. For the game creators, lowering costs and making titles widely available may actually bring a solution by stamping out the piracy, putting digital versions in more people's hands and letting them pay off what they want when they want. Has the potential to massively expand gaming research and profitability. By taking the same approach to Google as it has to online advertising, the clever game makers could turn a rampant copying games not only to the sincerest form of flattery, but to a workable future by making games more readily, faster to skim, and easier to pass along to friends. Game makers could actually be doing more to combat piracy than lawsuits or fancy countermeasures ever could. In conclusion, I'd like the developers and the companies producing the software and games would profit a lot more from piracy if the games were cheaper and easier to access. That piracy doesn't have to be a bad thing, but if it's getting your product out there to be seen by people who wouldn't normally buy the product, and happy customers enjoying the product will inevitably tell more people who want to be on that amazing bandwagon. I did decide that last quote, I didn't realize it was in there.
All right, well, I thought you did a nice job recapping what the advocate's claim was for the most part. There's not really much discussion after the first point about the evidence that the advocate used, except that it's exaggerated on this particular point. One of the arguments that you concede early on is that it's illegal, so there's not really a dispute about that. The question about whether or not it has an impact, that I think you do a reasonable job challenging the premise based on the data supplied by the Software Association. I thought that you had some good information suggesting that they are likely to exaggerate it, that it's going to be self-reported, that there's likely to be bias that's going on there, that there is a wide degree of variance between the people who are addressed or identified as pirates, that sort of thing. I thought that was pretty reasonable. And there's also a premise underneath the argument that suggests that people would be buying these products if they weren't stealing them, and I think that that's a good challenge to the reasoning of the software group. I'm not exactly sure that that was the argument that the advocate was making, but if it is, I think you could clarify it a little bit. So I thought that those challenges were pretty reasonable. It diminishes the argument to some degree. I'm not exactly sure that it eliminates it. Now, the second point, I think you need to signpost a little bit more clearly, but I do understand that you're making a counterclaim here that suggests that there is a long-term benefit from having access to pirated software by a variety of people, that there is some ancillary consequence that occurs as a result of that. And you've got some evidence on this, but it's mostly opinion evidence, and it certainly sounds speculative. We don't have a lot of data that suggests, for instance, that pirates do in fact then purchase upgrades, or that they buy the next edition of this, or that they pass it on their friends and that encourages those people to buy those things. This is all theoretical in nature, and it, I think, if I was responding to this, for example, if I was the advocate and we were having the debate, my first response to this would be, well, there's the rationalization of somebody who's trying to explain why they've committed a crime. All right, well, it doesn't really hurt you that much, because in the long run, but that doesn't change the fact that there has been a negative consequence here. So I think that there's a good argument here, that there's an idea here. The proof on it is a little bit thin on this point, and I think that's primarily because we're dealing with people who are, crooks, as they say, and you're kind of in an awkward situation. But the truth is, I hear that kind of rationalization all the time. This is what I've been hearing for 20 years about, ever since people figured out that they could download music online. It was like, oh my gosh, here's my rationalization for stealing. I can do it, and it's really, I wouldn't have bought it anyway, and you know what, in the long run, it's going to benefit somebody else. And you know what, I think there are probably indices of the music industry that we could look at that have changed. That might be a good analogy to draw for either side on this argument. Let's compare it to other industries where they have similar kinds of problems. Have those industries suffered disproportionately? And you would be arguing, of course, that they hadn't suffered disproportionately. So we still have substantial music industry. There's still people out there enjoying music. Blah 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 blah. Of course, the respondent would say, well, yeah, but the musicians don't make as much money. The recording industry is basically screwed, and the whole industry has had to transform, which is kind of the argument that you're making that says, time to change or die.
I tried to go with the more credible
Yeah.
sources.
No, I thought you did.
Books.
I thought you did.